What is the impact of trauma in education? How do students and teachers deal with trauma from their various perspectives? I'm Dave Morris here in the Oklahoman's Video Studio. Happy to be joined by Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Joy Hofmeister. Great to see you again.
Great to see you too.
And this is a topic that you have tackled both last year and then earlier this week. In what way?
Well, really it's about trauma-informed instruction. So what does that mean? It means thinking about how we work with students through a perspective that appreciates that our students have experienced adverse childhood experiences, which could mean abuse, neglect, witnessing violence, a parent who's incarcerated, even divorce. It can trigger behaviors that if a teacher isn't thinking about what they are seeing through that lens, they may have less of an ability to connect with that child and increase their learning. So this is about training.
You and your staff, Phil Bacharach, who's back over there taking some social media efforts right now, which we appreciate. Part of the collateral that I have here, one thing I noticed that I thought was an impactful statement: what has happened to the child, not what is wrong with the child.
That's right. So you can imagine that when you reframe how you think as a teacher or even a school board member that is setting a policy about discipline or suspension, that we want to stop and think, well, there is a child that you can tell is sleepy in the back of the room.
Why is that? Yeah.
And it starts the process of putting ourselves in the shoes of our students and recognizing where we are as a state. Our children have more poverty, more adverse childhood experiences than many other children in other times in our state and in the country. So we have to face and embrace where we are and start there, and then have the training and the strategies to help our kids learn. But we start by meeting them where they are.
And so I guess that's a good place for us to dive into. You had to kick off a summit to address this back in October.
Yes.
And large turnout.
We did. So we didn't just say, okay, anybody who has an interest, come. Instead, we looked at the Center for Disease Control, CDC, and their information about where we have the highest concentration of children who have experienced trauma, neglect, abuse, and a variety of other factors that can be measured. And we invited those school districts to bring a team. So we wanted the district leader, school and principal leaders, as well as teacher leaders, and community partners with mental health, counselors, etc., that support that community or that district, so that they could come as a team, receive training, and then reflect and ask the questions. Are we doing things that, with this information, will ensure that our students are able to learn and that we clear the pathway? A lot of this has to do with training and rethinking how we do what we do in schools. Because
of that information, there's a lot of rankings that support, hey, Oklahoma ranks not so great in various areas.
Right, and it's even more than not so great. So when we look at the fact that there is an index called the Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACEs index, where a student that has an incarcerated parent, that's one ACE, okay, on that scale. When you reach 4 out of 10, you now hit, according to research and evidence, a tipping point where all kinds of really consequences for those traumatic experiences will continue throughout a life. And it includes health, loss of good health standing, mental health that's not addressed. There's a compounded impact with even the change in the brain. We know that there is a change in the architecture of the brain if we do not work to move beyond trauma to hope. So that is what we bring with this conversation. Yes, is it true that Oklahoma has the largest concentration of children that are younger with an ACE score of 4 or higher? We lead the nation in that statistic. Another one that's extremely troubling, but we've got to embrace it and start where we are. And that is that half of our students have an ACE score of 3 or higher. Half of all of our students. So do half of all of our teachers have training? No. And so this is where we begin.
So you had a follow-up this past week with First Lady Sarah Stitt. She was involved as well.
That's right. We are grateful for the First Lady. Her focus is on children and on mental health supports for all of our families, regardless of age. But for this, a very, I think, a personal story that she was able to share that touched everyone that was attending. And at this point, we are grateful for the focus that we're seeing out of the Governor's office and the First Lady around ensuring that children have a strong beginning, and that we are attending to the impact of unaddressed mental health issues and how that impacts the children in our families and the children in our schools.
I think part of the study also indicated that this could lead to students dropping out of school, just the whole retention. It's a variety of things that the wheels could just come off. That's
true. So what you have is, if you are hungry, you can't learn.
Sure.
If you have a trigger that is, it could be the sound of an ambulance driving by the building. It could be news that, in fact, let me just share with you. Someone, a parent, saw that we were talking about this in schools and that we were training teachers. And she reached out on Facebook in a private message and said, "I'm so glad you're doing this. My son had a loss of a sibling in a fire, in a house fire, when he was very, very, very young. And then a number of years after that, on the very anniversary, their father passed away. But when you see him in the hallway in a school, you don't know that.
Right.
And so what we want to help our teachers think about is, let's put ourselves in a place where we don't immediately think that distracted behavior or inattentiveness or anger or a disengagement is for the reasons it might have been 30 years ago in an Oklahoma classroom.
Isn't it a fine line between, hey, little Johnny's acting up, and hey, little Johnny lost a sibling in a fire?
Right, and you don't know that.
Right.
So part of this is, how do you find these? How do you find this? It's through connection. And so we really need to focus on ensuring that children know that there is a caring adult in a school that they can connect with. That we will work to focus more on building relationships with our students, that there is a culture and climate of trust, and that we are also, as a state, providing a priority that we will train teachers. And I think this comes full circle with when we hear teachers talk about why they left Oklahoma schools. Yes, pay is a big piece of that, but resources for teachers, counselor that can coach that teacher, even how we talk about, don't just tell kids, don't do this, don't do that. Instead, tell them what to do. We use our walking, feet in the hall. I thank you for paying attention and for having, followed the directions. It's a change in how we talk. It's a change in how we think about making those connections. And if we don't, we will continue to wear teachers thin. Because if you feel that you can't make an impact because of increased class sizes, because of the lack of support for our students with not having counselors, not having the right speech-language pathologists that can provide the support for a special needs student, or you don't have the textbook, or you don't have the technology needed. These are what teachers describe as support for students. This is what the legislature refers to as classroom dollars. It all matters. It's not one thing. And that approach going forward must be strategic in this way.
Chatting with Joy Hofmeister, she's Oklahoma's State Superintendent for Public Instruction. You mentioned two things there. Resources, which we'll get to some action in the House that happened this morning in just a second. But you also mentioned counselors, and I believe I read that is something you're looking for, is to reduce the number of student per counselor ratio from like 1 to 400 to 1 to 200 That's something, right. Which still seems like it's a little overwhelming.
Yes, so Oklahoma is in no way close to being at the recommended counselor to student ratio. That recommendation is set at 1 counselor for 250 students. In Oklahoma, we are at 1 counselor to 435. And we're really only measuring that as part of state law for middle and high school. We need both academic guidance counselor, someone that can provide that kind of direction and support about the future and careers and pathways, especially as we're rolling out our ICAP, Individual Career Academic Planning, which starts early, gives children a vision for different fields and opportunities that tie and connect to their own passion, their own interests, and what problem they want to solve in life. But also provides with a school counselor corps that we're asking to have this as a brand new initiative in Oklahoma, that we build a school counselor corps that can also provide the licensed professional counselors in our schools, not to provide therapy, but to provide the kind of support that teachers need with coaching for trauma-informed instruction, as I described earlier, and then also that can be there for crisis counseling for our students, as we have children that are at risk for suicide, children that have experienced death in their own families, untreated mental health and addiction issues. These are all very real, but it all ties together, because as you see a plan for yourself and you begin to have a vision for that with ICAP, you can see hope for the future. And we know the work of OU professor Chan Hellman, who has really been the pioneer in the United States and abroad for the science of hope. So right here, Oklahoma is the epicenter of research around how to move beyond trauma to hope. And it is hope that is fostered in a child that builds resiliency. And that's what makes for a successful student and later a successful adult.
Joy, what are some next steps and perhaps some benchmarks that you guys are looking at with this?
So what we will continue to do is make very strategic asks of the legislature. We want to build training for teachers. We want to build supports and opportunity for students. We are going to look through with an eye on strategic investment, but our focus is going to be about people. We want to have teachers who have confidence they can make a difference and provide them the training and support, but we also have to recognize where we are. And we have to measure what matters. We want to focus on removing unnecessary assessment. We've accomplished that. But we also don't want to have a lingering preoccupation with teaching to the test. Let's drop that. Let's focus on learning for the long run, building relationships, helping teachers have autonomy, teach new academic standards, which have been rated very high now, from D to A level. And we are grateful and proud of that. But the teacher shortage is key to supporting students and building strong schools. But even more important are strong families. And this all has to work together. We are working with the governor, we're working with the First Lady, and we'll work with our legislature to think of this more about whole child, whole school, and whole community.
All right, well, speaking of the legislature, the Oklahoma House today advanced teacher pay raise, sending a $1,200 raise now to the Senate, and that'll then eventually, I guess, get to the governor's office. It's House Bill 1780 would increase the minimum starting pay in Oklahoma to $37,801. It passed 94-0 today. Your thoughts?
Well, unanimous support in the legislature, in the House. We appreciate each and every one of them who continue to make teachers a priority. It's going to be very important that Oklahoma is competitive. I want to be top of the region, just as we hear the governor talk, but we also want to be a top 10 state in outcome, which means more than pay, but this is a giant important step in investing in teachers. But teachers also tell us it can't be just that, so let's continue to keep our eye and focus on students, but we know that teachers are the key and most important person in the schoolhouse for impacting our students and lifting academic outcomes. So all of this has to fit together.
Governor Stitt, inauguration just weeks earlier. You've What's the professional relationship with you and the governor? How's that going?
It's going very well, and from the very beginning, I saw a leader that wanted to be very collaborative and rely on those with expertise in the various industry or sector. That has continued, and I appreciate that very much. I love the idea of, you know what, who's in front of us? Let's find a strategy to get ahead and compete and draw the focus and attention where it really matters, which is on kids, people, education, strong foundation, and building our economy through a stronger education system. So we've continued to see that play out as he has had several weeks now as our governor, and I'm encouraged by that, and I think that we have great promise going forward.
Joy Hofmeister, are you enjoying being state school superintendent?
Definitely. I love a challenge.
Yeah.
We have all gone through a very challenging time with economic downturn, with continuing to stay focused on what really matters for kids and accomplishing, I think, needed reform and change. As I mentioned earlier, academic standards are the very beginning. That's what do you teach in math at each grade level? What do you teach in reading at each grade level to ensure that our kids are ready for their next steps in learning when they graduate from high school? How do we help build internal interest and capacity within kids to be able to do what they want to do instead of arriving at the end of high school and finding out, oh no, doors have shut on me that I had no idea were closing. We want to back that up and make certain that our kids are ready and that we do our, I believe, moral responsibility and complete that by preparing and investing in them earlier and having a strong beginning so we can have a strong finish.
Any thoughts on your career beyond state school superintendent? Would you run for another office, another position perhaps?
Wow. Well, I'm thinking about the next 4 years right now as state superintendent. We have unfinished work here, and I like to finish what I start.
All right, I'll keep asking that along the way, as I do with every politician who comes in. Let me ask you this. I see other states, West Virginia, I think they ended their strike, teacher walkout earlier this week. We saw some, was it Denver and some other states? Are other states, communities approaching Oklahoma, approaching you in your office about, hey, how did Oklahoma go through this, maybe best practices? Anybody reaching out to you guys?
You know, what I am seeing is a lot of people repeated the message that we in Oklahoma delivered. That message was, it's not just about pay, it is about students, it is about investing in public education, and there is talk about counselors as well, and the support of students. You know, what was accomplished in Oklahoma was pretty significant. Had an opportunity to actually speak and present in front of, on a totally different reason, but the governors of some of those states that had experienced the walkouts. And what we accomplished, even before the walkout with pay, was exceeding some of those other states in terms of the percentage of that increase. At the end of the day, and this was part of my message as I shared, it's not about one thing. It has to be about the collective impact of all of these decisions, and they have to provide for our students the kind of support they need. So that's got to fit an individual state. And in Oklahoma, we're going to just stay focused on where we are, what we are providing for our kids, how we are investing in the people that will make that opportunity possible for them, and then let's just clear the path and let us rise. We can. I feel the energy in the legislature. I see the commitment in our governor. The opportunity is one that gives me hope as I'm a part of the process and seeing it play out today.
And my final question for you, school report cards come out at the end of the month. How's that going to differ from perhaps years past, and what's going to be measured here?
You know, it's really going to be different in this way. This report card is focused on growth. So what is happening when a student arrives and that student may be far below where we want them to be by the time they finish a grade? But we will be measuring the important work that schools are doing over many different indicators, not just one test score. We are improving on the way it was done in the past. It is one that reflects Oklahoma and the focus on growth, but also keep in mind we have set a high bar with national comparability now. So we have set a bar that exceeds anything we've ever had before and said, you know, if you're ready to hit the ground running and you don't need remediation if you leave here and go to career tech for industry certification or into college or military service, we want you to be ready, and that's our bar, that readiness for success and next steps. And there's gaps, and we are identifying that. But we're also mindful of every student can grow, every school can improve, and we are part of a continuous improvement model ourselves. And it's about measuring what matters, not double and triple counting or hyper-focusing on only certain kids, but all kids, whether they're far behind, whether they're right in the middle, or very advanced. They all should have the opportunity to grow from the beginning of the school year to the end. And it's not something that gets turned around overnight, but every child deserves our best this year.
Joy Hofmeister, she's fired up, ladies and gentlemen. I always enjoy a conversation with you. I certainly appreciate your time. Thanks to Phil Bacharach for his information on this. Hey, one last thing. Sure. One of the state's spelling bees is coming up. Were you ever a speller back in the day? Were you a good speller? Did you ever compete in a spelling bee?
I didn't. So, you know, that is not a strength in my history or in my family. So we have great admiration for all of those who have strong spelling skills. So.
As do I. Best of luck to all of them. Again, Joy Hofmeister, Oklahoma State School Superintendent for Public Instruction. We thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.